Welcome everyone to this episode of Insider Interviews, presented by Rogers Athletic. My name is Pat Cohan, and our guest for today's show is Doug Gnodtke, the Chief of Staff for the University of Michigan. This is the third episode of the Rogers Stronger program series, where we're talking to coaches, athletic directors, and trainers about off-field topics like building a strength training program or life after sport. In this episode of hiring, retaining, and growing championship coaching staffs. Before we dive into this topic, we want to thank our sponsor, Rogers Athletic, the premier provider of football practice and pendulum strength training equipment. If you're interested in learning more, go to go.rogersathletic.com/insider. Doug, thanks so much for joining us. Just so our audience has some context, what is your official role at the University of Michigan, and how does that apply to hiring, retaining, and growing the coaching staffs?
Yeah, no, my pleasure to be here. Unofficially, I do all the stuff the athletic director doesn't want to do. I think that's the chief of staff role. I oversee our external operations on a daily basis, which, marketing, ticketing, licensing, our relationship with Learfield, our video department, communications, as well as I'm the sport administrator for our football and women's lacrosse programs. And I also chair our sport administrator group, where all 29 teams have someone on our leadership team level that is the sport administrator for daily interaction with the coaches. So I chair that group. So I work directly with our football and women's lacrosse program, as I said, but then we'll have interaction and conversations with all of our head coaches and assistant coaches and staff throughout the department. That's sort of the chief of staff role.
What is the philosophy when it comes to hiring a coach at Michigan? Is there a defined, we hire this type of person, or is it kind of willy-nilly based on the supervisor or the head coach?
Yeah, I think it all starts at the top with our president and here at our board of regents, and they really set the culture for the entire university. And not that they're necessarily passing out, here's a paragraph about hiring, but when you're at an institution, you get a sense of what it's going to take to be successful. And then it goes down to our athletic director and his leadership team. And really it starts off, especially at an institution like Michigan, how can that coach support, championship culture academically, compliance wise, following all the rules, supporting the individual's growth as an individual and as part of a team, in the community and on campus, or are they growing as young men and women? And obviously we want to compete for Big Ten championships. So, it's not an exact science with that, because there's people sometimes you identify, you think are going to be a home run, and then sometimes they just don't work out. But a lot of times we can really, when it comes to academics and compliance and creating, a positive student athlete experience, those are things we can control more. What happens on the field of play, especially out of my control, but even out of the coach's control sometimes. And if all those areas are moving, at least in the right direction, that we always feel like the wins will come along more so than the losses. But it's just overall that positive student athlete experience. And how is this individual as the leader of that program, or as an assistant coach of that program, going to support all those different values?
How do you balance the reality that if the wins don't come, the job will end for you?
It's hard because, you're not cutting corners in any of those areas. As we've talked about, the wins and losses is the most random aspect of a lot of this. And there's great coaches and successful coaches, especially in the collegiate level, who have lost their job because they haven't won enough. And it is hard, but I think it's something, especially at the Division I level, unfortunately, coaches know that kind of going into it. And especially, at the Big Ten level, the amount of time and energy and resources we're investing in our programs, it's that expectation. And I don't think, not that college programs are sitting there, hey, we just want you to go 500 or win, a game a year and you're going to be successful. People are striving for more, but if you're doing all the other things in the right way, it can maybe give you a little bit more runway to get those wins and losses and that right balance. But as an administrator, how can I support that? And if my expectation is, hey, you got to win the conference every year, well, am I doing everything I can to put you in that right position? Because how much time and energy and effort is a coach doing to schedule officials and buses, or is that something the AD can be doing so the coach can spend more time breaking down film or spending time in the weight room with the students? Like, those are all things that, at Michigan, we try to remove as much as we can from the coach's plate so they can work with the current student athletes on and off the field and then recruit future student athletes. So they're not worried about buses or when their flight home this weekend gets canceled due to inclement weather and they're missing a plane and all those other things. That's the support structure we want to put around them. And I think as you're interviewing and having those discussions, just be realistic with what those expectations are and how we are going to support them when they're here. So,
who is the best head coach you've worked with at hiring and retaining great assistants?
The most successful things I've seen is when a head coach has involved, like on the football side, the other assistant coaches to go through, or if it's a smaller staff, bringing in the academic advisor, bringing in someone from compliance, bringing HR in. So you're getting a more holistic view as opposed to, well, this is the one person I want, and we're just going to go through kind of a sham of a process to hire the individual I've already identified going into this process. Because I don't think you're doing your program or yourself as a leader any favors doing that, because you're not opening yourself up to some new possibilities.
A lot of times at the high school level, it's just trying to find somebody qualified and willing to do the job. Even getting a teacher, some states they have to be a teacher. So if you were a high school AD, what would you be willing to compromise maybe on the things we talked about earlier in terms of standards and philosophy of who's going to be successful here? And what would you not be willing to compromise just to get somebody to fill the role?
I mean, to me, I look at a lot of our successful coaches at Michigan, and I would say, yeah, you may sacrifice some things in X's and O's, but if you take Carol Hutchins, their softball coach, who's the winningest softball coach in NCAA history, and we named her our head football coach, I think she would put our team in a position to be successful. Now, she'd have to rely upon other people to do X's and O's and game plan through those things, but just the type of leader she is and how she can keep people going in one direction, I think those things would follow. And not that you're cutting corners or anything, but to me, it's like, who's going to create an environment, number one, for the health and safety of the students participating in their sport. And you have that there, and then you start setting those expectations to be successful. How do you carry yourself? You're going to class, you're coming to practice every day, you're working hard, you're listening to your teammates, you're listening to your coaches. The X's and O aspects of it, I think, would be the one area. I mean, it's great to have someone who played the sport growing up or played the sport in college at some level or something like that. But if they're in it for the right reasons and they want to help young people grow, and they kind of create that championship atmosphere, you can learn a lot watching YouTube. You can go to coaching clinics. You can go to other seminars and things like that to learn more about implementing the game. But you get everybody going in the right direction, I think that can solve a lot of problems for you right there.
How do you identify who can do that, though? Like, there's like that.
I would not be talking to you right now if I had that answer, because I'd be like at every hotel clinic speaking across the world. I mean, every coach we have is successful sort of for different reasons. That's one thing I enjoy about my job, is I can see 29 different leaders and what they do to be successful. And you can't copy, well, this coach does this, so I'm going to act like that person, or this is what my coach did when I was playing, and follow that philosophy to a T, because that's not being authentic to yourself.
Is there a thread that you can kind of see, like, oh, yep,
they try? I mean, and that's what's so hard. Like, a lot of times with Olympic sports, you can actually conduct a process and bring coaches to campus, and you meet with them, and they're meeting with people all over the place. But then a lot of times, the Division I FBS level for football, it's like speed dating, and a coach announces they're leaving, and all of a sudden the fans 5 hours later saying, well, haven't they hired the new coach yet? And you're dealing with all this, the internet and Twitter's ablaze with all these things, and you're kind of speed dating. People are tracking planes, all this craziness, and it's hard because you're investing really at this level millions of dollars and the careers and livelihoods of hundreds of people on making a decision that, every day you go longer to make those decisions, people are more in a frenzy about why haven't you gone yet? And sometimes, you can identify someone right away and it works out great. Other times it doesn't. but no one ever says, well, if they would have taken more time to figure that out, they would have gotten it right. You're on to the next one. And it's hard because, coaches sometimes are getting 1-2 years to turn something around, which is crazy. I understand there's all these pressures, but yeah, I mean, there is no perfect formula that I've seen yet that can guarantee success. And you see that sometimes too. A coach is very successful at one school and then they go to another school and it just doesn't work.
When you're dealing with that speed dating situation, what do you tell yourself, or what is the internal staff communication to try to, not make that knee-jerk reaction decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I've learned that I think's worked well, like in a men's basketball or a football search, is our athletic director has always had the conversation between like sort of like, hey, they've called the president. This is my preferred candidate. This is the one I'm thinking of making an offer to. I'd like you to spend some time with them. And I've never heard a president, ask questions, what kind of offense do you run, coach, in football, or, what's your defensive philosophy, things like that. But I think it allows a good pause in how are they interacting with the school president, and knowing, they're not working necessarily day in and day out with them, but it's sort of just a kind of a neutral read where they haven't gone through all the different candidates, and they may not be as emotionally invested in the selection as you are in that process. Because we know you got season ticket holders and an uproar, donors calling you all the time, what's going on, people reading false rumors on the internet, like supposedly, we're going to hire this candidate, and we're like, we never even talked to that person, but they're just trying to leverage a better deal with their athletic director. And I think it'd be great if we could take more time and involve more people, but sometimes that's just not feasible. But to me, that president's sort of one good catch-all that can kind of go there. We haven't had a president kind of veto a selection yet, but college presidents are pretty smart individuals, and they'll have a good read on those people, and they can kind of give you some good insights that maybe you haven't thought of before in that process.
How would you recommend approaching an individual that is working for another school about a job opening that your school has?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have a conversation with the candidate before I make any phone call, just to make sure I'm not walking into a trap or they're walking into a trap.
Right.
And I think you hopefully have a relationship. If it is someone cross town or someone in another school, like, you have a relationship where you call upon them and they would understand. I mean, at the end of the day, my fiduciary responsibility is to my school and my institution. So I'm going to do what's best for them. There may be conversations at the diner for the next 6 months if you make that type of hire, but as long as I feel I'm making the right call and it's the right person, you do it. I mean, we've had people who graduated from Michigan coach at Michigan State. Gary Moeller played at Ohio State and was a head football coach at Michigan. Bo Schembechler was a GA for Woody Hayes at Ohio State. Like, there's those things that cross over. And I think, the quick emotional response, people get triggered by it, but at the end of the day, you got to hire the right people. Carol Hutchins played
Michigan State.
And yeah. Nobody questions her loyalty to the University of Michigan, but she's also a Sparty at heart, and you can't fault her for that. Well, maybe a little bit, but.
So say I was a head coach at Michigan and I had an assistant that got a head coaching offer that's a decent one that they would probably take. Should I support them and say, hey, you did a great job, excited about this opportunity for you? Or should I try to do everything I can to keep them on my staff because they were so great?
It depends. I think sometimes you do. And, I would have conversations like, hey, do you think they're ready for that job? Because it is a big step up being a head coach. And you do get, coaches sometimes who are so anxious for that opportunity that they have blinders on and they're not looking at anything else except that kind of that end goal. And, those are hard conversations to have, but that's where I think as an administrator, I can come in and talk to them about, like, hey, I know you think you're ready, but here's some things have you even considered before? Because, they may be so focused on recruiting or, on-field development, they're not worried about the cultural fit or academic fit, or, is it a program that, it looks great, but you know what, you got to raise 85% of your budget every year. So you're not going to be on the field coaching, or you're not going to be recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's that honesty and being upfront. And for me, having conversations with assistants, like, what do you want to do? What are you looking at? I love it when sometimes in the off season, coaches will say, hey, what are the questions you ask in the interview for me to go through so they can start thinking about that process? Because you want to be ready for it. And then I think they want to be having those conversations with the coach, knowing too, it's like, hey, coach, I'm not looking to go just for the sake of leaving, but if the right thing comes up and it's the right fit and I feel like I'm ready for it, like, I'm going to do that. And as Mitch said it earlier, you can't fault the coach for trying to improve their situation for themselves or their family for that. But if they're saying this every summer and they're interviewing for 15 jobs, then that's something else. You got other worries at that point with that person on your staff.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have like a systematic, I need to touch base with every single coach on every other week in a personal way. Do you have kind of a checklist, check-in checklist?
Yeah, I try to keep it in my head. It's hard to keep up, but
Yeah.
I follow all of our teams on social media and our coaches on social media just to make sure I get a sense of what's going on with them. And especially this time of year on a Saturday or Sunday, you see what's going on. And after a great win, texting a coach and saying, great job, we're trying to get out to practice the following week. But I have a lot of work to do in that area, but you try to cover it as much as possible. Because it's good. And it's difficult too. We're so spread out as a department. One of the great benefits we have is so many of our teams have their own individual facilities. So they have kind of what they need, but it's hard because I've been at other schools where all the coaches are down one hallway, and it's great because you can see everybody in one afternoon. And I think it's invaluable for the coaches too to have that support network when they're having a rough spot or they're going through something else, and they can pop their door open and talk to some of their colleagues who are going through similar things.
Is it only a one-way conversation? Because it's like you putting the effort to go get with the coach. I mean, have you ever had coaches that are really good at just checking in with you? Hey, Doug, how you doing? Just wanted to pop in and see if you needed anything or make it easy for you.
Sometimes, but I don't have that expectation just because I know they got a lot going on. And they understand I got a lot going on too, but I think that's kind of more defined in my role. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes the coaches that have made more of an effort for that, I've appreciated that. And I think a lot of times those are the ones too, the individuals that are like, I want to be a head coach over the next 5 years. And this is what I'm working towards. And they're doing that for their growth, which I think is good. And trust me, it's always nice to get a text from a coach after a big win and saying, hey, thanks for your help. Or, they win a championship, and I could have the most minuscule part, if any, in that championship, but they're appreciative of those things. And, I'm not as concerned about that for me, but to let their staff know. We had a freak snowstorm come in and put down like 2 inches of snow Sunday morning. And we had a lacrosse game that we had to push back an hour to start. And then later that day or the next afternoon, our lacrosse coach tweeted out a shout out to our facilities staff for clearing the field on time. And I didn't tell her to do that, but she wanted to do it on her own. And I think it's awesome. And, those are the little things that kind of help in the grind when you have so many teams competing at the same time. And it's freaking middle of March and you got 2 inches of snow coming down and over an hour time frame. And,
but you
those
noticed
the little things that help.
Yeah. You as the administrator talking about that runway, right? That coach maybe got 2 more feet on the runway if you had a bad season or if something happened. They just got a little bit more equity with you who might be evaluating their potential firing.
And well, and it just helps reinforce Hannah's character as a coach and as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And, recognizing, unfortunately we didn't win that game. But I think she recognized that hey, there's more, we wouldn't have played the game if this crew hadn't gone out there and cleared our field for us.
Right.
And it gave us the opportunity to compete. And I think sometimes, we all can lose sight of those things. And our facility staff takes great pride in presenting these awesome facilities for the student athletes to compete on and giving them, they're not doing it for the recognition or glory, but whenever a coach can show that a token of appreciation or even a tweet like that, I think it goes a long way.
I love that. I'm going to get into the section of our interview that is very based on the coach interviewing or applying for the job. So for you today, right now, what is sticking out the most into for the candidates that are applying and interviewing for jobs at your school?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when you sit down with them, you get a sense of that presence. And I think another thing that you kind of need to do, and again, sorry to go back on me and what I need to do, but seeing interviews with them, going on YouTube, or have they spoken
Yeah.
at coaching clinics? Have they, like, what's
Interesting.
their image on social media? If they played that sport and there's interviews of that on YouTube back when they were playing, like you if you see what they were like as an 18 to 22-year-old, you'll probably get a good sense of what they're like as an adult. And we've all hopefully grown and mature over those times, but so much of what we do in athletics is that external facing things, interacting with recruits, interacting with alumni, interacting with donors, interacting with the community, interacting with other
that you
administrators.
never know who's watching type
Yeah.
thing.
And just think, how are they going to carry themselves? And that's where I like to see, like, yeah, you want to hear the press conference from the podium after they won something, but even after a loss, how are they handling that? Are they sitting there blaming everybody else and throwing their players under the bus, even though they're the ones who've coached and maybe recruited them? Or are they saying the things that they need to do better? And are they trying to deflect blame from an 18-year-old and trying to put it on someone on their shoulders who's doing that coaching for a profession? So, I love, after the candidate go home, so you send that survey out to 15, 20 people that interact with these individuals. And you get it's one thing to sit in a conference room and people are throwing a bunch of questions at you, but when they're out having dinner with maybe someone from compliance and academics the night before, like, what are they like? Are they letting their guard down too much? Are they sitting there going, hey, when are we going to order the pitcher of margaritas or something like that? And you're like, whoa, like, that's not the type of thing we're going through here. And you get a more holistic view of them, as opposed to anybody can put on a good front for 45 minutes in a conference room.
Are you sending a survey out to everybody that had a contact? You briefly mentioned it, but is that something that you guys do?
Typically, when we have that luxury of time, I'll do that for staff positions too. We've hired directors of ticket operations and other positions like that. And it's like, yeah, you want to kind of go through the ringer just to see how they are interacting with different groups of people that they're going to be working with in this department. And I think that helps them feel like they're a part of that process too. And as a candidate, if you're not seeing that, you're like, well, what are they hiding from me? Like, if I'm not going to meet with my academic advisor liaison or compliance liaison or HR, like, what are they missing from me? Because they're going to be working with them when they get to campus. You better give them the full look of it during the interview process.
Right. Now, you mentioned that you look at social media. What role does social media really play in your searching and, maybe the value of a candidate?
Yeah. I mean, there's people who I think put stuff out there that's just a complete front, and they're trying to portray a particular image. Not that people have to be active on it, because I'm not. I use it as a news aggregator much more so than people don't need to know my thoughts or opinions on things at different times. But if they are involved in it, what does that look like? Are they consistent? You get people who tweet every hour when they're winning, and then they don't, they lose the last few games of the year, and then they go dormant for 6 months. Like, why use it if you're not going to be consistent with it, type of a thing. So I think it's just one tool. It's another evaluation. People need to be aware of that stuff. You can't hide it. And it's just something you have to be aware of as a coach, and it's one thing, 12 years ago when such and such was in high school, they said something. Like, we all said dumb things when we were in high school or that age. We say dumb things now, but it's not going to necessarily be the final decision maker in something. But I think you'd be naive if you weren't looking at it in the vetting process just to see what's out there. Because if you're not looking for it, someone else will, and you're dealing with a whole bunch of cleanup on the back end if you're not aware of it when it's out there.
What about the lack of social media presence? Does that put up a red flag, or does that dock a candidate at all?
No, I think it'd be probably something I'd want to talk about if it's just complete gung-ho, like, I hate it, I never want to do anything with it. It's like, all right, well, I understand that for you, but do you have it so you can DM kids? Are you doing it so you can follow the recruits and see what they're talking about? We're hiring a coach, not necessarily a social media pro, but it is a tool, and it's something that's out there. And if you're not aware of how kids are interacting and using with it. To me, that's more of a red flag than for their own personal branding. They're not out there putting stuff out there all the time. But are they, at least, do they see the value in it, whether or not they're an active participant or not? I would say is important.
What's your biggest pet peeve in the interviewing and the reviewing process? So as you're going through their social feeds or as you're evaluating them, something that comes up, and if somebody does it, it's like, oh man, they stapled the paper wrong or something small. Like, what is yours?
Most of the time it's PDF attachments, I feel, not things papered, unfortunately. But I think something that bothers me is when you get people who are expressing interest in a position because they're trying to leverage something with their current school or institution.
Yeah.
And that to me is a waste of my time. And, a lot of times it can be a high stress thing going through these coaching changes. And it just kind of ticks you off when people are wasting your time for their own selfish gain and purpose. And, understand people they're going to do what they have to do, but that's something that's bothersome for me. Or when you're trying to have a confidential process and then something leaks out there because of that. And again, that's for their own personal gain. I mean, those are the things that just kind of turn me off completely. And athletics is a very small world. You never know when you're going to run into somebody again, as well as, there'll be times where my colleagues at other schools are looking for something, they'll call me to pick my brain, and they may mention somebody's name, and I'll say, oh, let me tell you about them. Mm-hmm. Because they were the first person to call us, and then magically they got a new contract a week later from their current school. And guess what? They did the same thing 2 years before that and 2 years before that. It's just, to me, that's not right.
What advice do you have for that football coach that is hungry for that job? They think they're qualified, but the positions aren't there, or the process hasn't really favored them in getting them in front of an AD to get that nod? I
think working to expand your network. So if you're a high school coach, try to work different camps and clinics that you can to kind of put your name out there. Have conversations with coaches at other schools during different times. They'll run each other on the road for different clinics or recruiting things, and just, it's going to take work too. These opportunities aren't going to present themselves, but what things can you do to help put yourself in that position? Assistant coaches from other schools pregame will kind of come up to you or the athletic director and, hey, nice to meet you, I'm so-and-so. And not like they don't have their resume in the back pocket and hand it to you, but you spend a few minutes chatting with them and you kind of file away. All right, who is that person? And maybe go online and figure it out. And then, I mentioned earlier, athletics is a small world, and there's never too many degrees of separation from people, and that's where, as you call different people you trust and admire, like, hey, what do you know about this individual? And sometimes they'll say, hey, I have no idea. It doesn't mean they're not a good person. I just never run across them. Or sometimes they'll say, hey, he's a really good person, an up and comer, and they introduced themselves to me at a convention one time, and blah blah blah. And those are the things that can help. And maybe it's not here, but if I have a colleague at another school who's looking for something, it could be a name I could suggest or say, hey, take a look at this person. Run into them a couple of times and they seemed impressive.
Right. Say I'm prepping for an interview. Is it leave behind valuable at all?
I mean, I've seen people who love it. I'm kind of neutral with it. I like to see some thought, but I don't need to see someone come in with a 100-page binder and all they did was do find and replace and remove school A with school B in there. Because I've seen also people, they've left the name of the other schools they've interviewed for in the leave behind.
God, it's like a recruit trying to do those mass emails. Like, I'm interested in your school.
You got to make sure you don't mess up that way. Like, to me, it's one thing now that you just need to send me, John Wooden's coaching pyramid. But if you have something that shows, hey, this is who I am, and it can be on one page and it could leave an impact with me, I'd be more impressed with that than, like I said, something that's just, well, every time I do a job search, this is what I'm doing. Because hopefully you should be able to explain to me kind of that elevator pitch. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to bring to the school. And this is why I believe I'm the right fit. More so than on day 88 of my first 100 days, I'm going to be doing this and meeting with these people and these individuals. Because you have no idea if that's even feasible at this school. So don't act like you necessarily know all those things, unless maybe it's an internal candidate who is already familiar with a lot of those people. But it's nice to know who you want to meet with in those 100 days, but don't send me a mock calendar because chances are it's not going to fall on that perfect day.
And just to close, what is your favorite interview question and why?
Oh, geez. I don't know if I particularly have one. Sometimes I like to just see, something that doesn't necessarily reflect their sport or their coaching philosophy, just who they are as an individual. Like, what do you like to do in your spare time? And there's plenty of coaches who have no hobbies and they have no interest outside their sport, and that's fine. But like, that's good for me to know that's what I'm getting into with somebody versus, I get a phone call at Thursday night at 7:30 and I don't pick up because I'm at my daughter's ballet lesson. They're not going to be sitting there screaming and calling back 15 times in a row because they're trying to figure out something that isn't that important, but because they're locked in the building doing whatever, that's the only thing on their mind. So I trying to get a sense of who they are off the field as well. And yeah, not that you need to have a family or you need to have hobbies, but that's going to help me figure out as I work with this individual, who am I dealing with and what are their expectations of me? I'm always available and accessible, but that doesn't mean I got to answer the phone every time you call, depending on what I'm doing. So.
Well, Doug, I thank you for your time. Appreciate all the insight that you've given us, and wish you the best of luck with your next season. I think you have like 28 sports going on right now or some wild number, but wish you the best of luck and thanks for taking the time.